Welcome back to Following No One on a Stormlight podcast. This week is episode 78, and we are finishing part 3 of Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson. We have quite a bit to talk about this week. We have some deaths to talk about. Spoiler alert, if you haven't read the chapters, please go do that.
Proper spoilers.
We have not a lot of groundbreaking information, but there's some like hidden in these action chapters, and you have to be looking for it, but there are some, and I'll be pointing them out if you guys didn't catch it. But Elliot, how are you?
I'm good. I too felt like there were, in classic Sanderson fashion, some nuggets hidden in amongst like the adrenaline rush. I'm very convinced at this point that he's doing this on purpose. He gets you all excited. He gets you like page turning, and then he slides in these little like secrets. Like, I'm gonna tuck this in here because no one is gonna notice. It's definitely intentional at this point.
Absolutely. Paul, how are you?
I'm doing great. You're right. Sanderson is very devious.
Mm-hmm.
I am really excited to talk to y'all, so y'all can tell me all of the cool tidbits I missed, as I was the page turner who was like, okay, what's happening next, until the very end. So, really excited to talk about part 3 this week. Though we have another person on the mug, which we're gonna shout out. So we have a surgeon. 98% sure I'm correct. We have a surgeon this week. And that is Rocco. Everyone say hi to Rocco.
Thank you, Rocco.
You're on the mug this week. It is a standard green. I'm colorblind. Thermos cup mug thing here. So, congratulations, Rocco.
Yes.
We appreciate your support.
Rocco is a surgeon, and we do appreciate you supporting us on Patreon. Thank you very much.
I'm
Thank
getting
you.
more accurate. I'm bringing my recognition levels up here.
All right,
You're 2 for 7 now.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
He's 3 for 7. He got Ranks and Amy correct, so
I did.
We're on a 3-week win streak.
I'm at
so.
like 33% or so.
The reverse sweep. Here it comes.
A little above, yeah.
All right, without further ado, 2 words to summarize this episode. Paul.
This isn't a joke, but my 2 words, like, each word on its own has their meaning, but my words are big, sad.
Okay. Elliot?
I don't know why that's funny. It shouldn't be. So my 2 words, in no particular order, are shock and fulcrum.
Wow. Shock and fulcrum and big sad. Okay, let's use these 4 words and finish part 3 of Oathbringer. All right, Paul, let you go first.
All right, big sad, fellas. Okay, so I'm not only am I big sad about Elhokar's death, right? Well, I'm going to talk about sad first. Sad is with the death of Elhokar. I didn't think I would, especially if you asked me like a book ago or maybe half a book ago, even like, would you be sad if Elhokar died? I'd be like, no, like who cares? I do not care. But it was sad to see Elhokar die because it felt like he died right at the beginning of his redemption arc, of like his redemption arc coming into fruition.
Right.
So that was really sad, and there was just a lot of intense emotions throughout those episodes. So that was a part of it. Big is mostly for chapter 87, which is like in the audiobook it's like 3 minutes long. It's super tiny, and it's in Shadesmar, and we see our Sprint, and they are very big, and I thought that was really cool. And so that was the main reason I chose it. Also, that and just like the magnitude of our fight and stuff at the beginning, and it was really cool. So big and sad.
Cool. Elliot?
I chose shock and fulcrum. shock for the events that we see here. I think I was in a little bit of shock coming through the end of these chapters. If you're one of our Patreon supporters and have access to our live reactions channels, you know that I had to process a little bit of that live in the live reactions channel, because I was like, what did I just read? And but also Kaladin goes into shock here in this chat. We'll talk about it later, but I was in shock that Kaladin was in shock. That I did not see that coming from him. He's usually kind of when things get messy, he kicks into action. And the opposite happened here, which was really interesting. And then Fulcrum, I picked Fulcrum, and another shout out to our Discord. We've been talking about this a lot in our Discord lately, about the symmetry of not just the events in like each individual book, but the events and the structure of the entire book series as a whole, referring to the first half of the Stormlight Archives, the first 5-book series. This part 3 of Oathbringer is the middle. This is the fulcrum, if you will, of the lever where it all meets. And I'm still trying to process like just how important this is. And I think we need to read the back half to maybe fully appreciate like why this section is so important. But I've been really focusing in on like, how is this story going to change thematically and structurally, like all kind of based around this fulcrum of the events that we just saw here in these chapters. So I've dove into that a little bit, but I know there's way more to unpack, so I'm looking forward to that.
Cool. Yeah, the Brandon Sanderson in the opening of The Way of Kings Prime, he has a foreword to The Way of Kings Prime, which is over on my bookshelf over there. He talks about how he worked the graveyard shift at a hotel, and when he at a reception desk, and when there was nobody walking into the hotel from midnight to 4 a.m. and he's got to sit there and do nothing, he would write. And everybody at the time, this was like right about the year 2000. Everybody at the time, all the publishers that he was sending books out to, were telling him, stop world building, just get to the action. Stop world building, just get to the action. And he talks to himself about like, well, what do I want to do? Would I be okay with writing an action book if I never got would I be okay with writing a book that I wanted to write about like a really in-depth world? Would I be okay with that if I never got published? And the answer he came to was yes, that's what I want to write, so that's what I'm going to write. I don't care if I get published or not. So he claims, I don't know if this is true, but he claims he wrote 400,000 words about Roshar before he wrote a word of The Way of Kings. Let me say that again. The Way of Kings is less than 400,000 words altogether. He wrote 400,000 words about Roshar before he wrote a word of The Way of Kings.
I'll just chime in and say, if it was any other author, I wouldn't believe them. But that man Sanderson can churn out the words.
Yes.
My goodness, he can write. So I believe it. I believe it.
So with this whole palindrome thing that we've hit the fulcrum of it, Eliot, that you're talking about, and the whole idea of a 5 books and then another 5 books and then splitting that 5 into another half. So you're right at 2.5 right now, and there's some very significant themes, very significant events that are taking place that he would have like thought about and wrote about long before he got the published stamp on The Way of Kings in 2010. So that's where we are right now.
And to shine a different light or think about it a different way, halfway through the first series of Stormlight Archives, guys, this seemed like a crazy far away time when we started this podcast a year and a half ago. So, man, we've come a long way. Look at us.
We have come a long way.
I was thinking the same thing. Like heading out, it really has taught us, especially since we've been pacing ourselves right, not just reading as fast as we can. It really has taught us, journey before destination, right?
Indeed.
I'll reference the words there, and it's been a while, but it's really cool to see how far we've come, because we've come a long way. Um, and I honestly didn't know what to expect when I got here, so almost here. I don't know where we are, but yeah. Are we still following Noadon, by the way? That's a good question.
That is a good question.
We haven't heard from him in a while, but anyways, sorry. That's not a rabbit trail we should go down. We have bigger fish to fry.
All right, chapter 83. Let's start our assault on the palace. We just got out of some pretty hectic chapters with Shallan and Kaladin. Both of them went on their little side quests in the city. Kaladin joined the wall guard, figured out their secrets of they have a soulcaster. Shallan joined the Revel, figured out their secrets of the Unmade, protecting the Oath Gate. Now they've got their information, they're attacking the palace. And this chapter opens up with Adolin sitting in his room. And he's really nervous. And like he's tired. He didn't sleep much last night because Shallan wasn't home. He was worried about her. And Adolin's like wrestling with himself, like, wait, why don't I feel good? I'm about to go into battle. I do this all the time. Like this is what I'm literally born to do. I can fight a battle. And it dawns on him that he's not wearing his mother's necklace, which he always uses before he goes into a duel. He hasn't eaten his chicken, and his other tradition is he talks to his sword. So he summons the Shardblade and starts talking to his sword. And do you guys remember what he says to it?
I was just looking that up in the book because I didn't remember, so no.
If you have it in front of you, you can read it, but I can paraphrase if you don't have it.
Go for the paraphrase. He kind of rambles a little bit. I don't know that I need to read the whole thing.
He does ramble. It dawns on him that his sword was once alive. It was once a spren of a now dead, presumably, Knights Radiant of old, and that bond had been split, and now there's a dead spren in front of him. And he kind of talks about like, well, I'm sorry, I can't really do anything about that, but I've always tried to use you for good. And I'm going to keep doing that as long as you're okay with that. And the sword doesn't respond because it's dead. But Adolin's always had this weird relationship with his sword, but now it's kind of in a weird perspective for us because we know his sword was once alive, and he's got a lot of respect for his Shardblade, and rightfully so.
I remember clearly back to some of the first times when we saw him do this, and we even kind of wildly speculated like it wouldn't be all that crazy for the sword to start talking back to him. I think is some of the things we said back then. Not realizing nearly close to what the reality might be that this is an actual spren he's holding in his hand, one that used to be bonded with a Radiant and is now dead due to the breaking of that bond. So yeah, way different perspective now.
Do we think that he's going to reignite that somehow? I feel like that's totally possible.
I will come back to that in this episode. I will come back to that.
Okay, cool. Yeah, make sure if you're watching or listening, stay tuned in the episode to where Trevor says I'm right. Okay, I'm sorry. I've been waiting for that for a long time, so
You'll have to keep waiting, sorry.
typical.
As Adolin and Azure and Kaladin, and Elokar, don't want to leave him out, they're all marching on the palace, and it dawns on Adolin that there was a one time where I was the strongest force on a battlefield. My shard blade and my dueling ability was the strongest force on a battlefield. But then Kaladin and his Andrei and Scar take off into the sky above him. There's this huge colossal giant troll stone thing that comes over the wall, and he just kind of muses to himself for a second, like, we're entering an era of gods. Like, if I'd seen this a year ago, I'd have been like, what the, so.
That quote, that little moment was, I had to pause and like agree with Adolin for a second there. It feels like, and Trevor, you warned us of this actually, that the scope of what we're dealing with has just increased tenfold, 100-fold from where we started, right? We used to be following Kaladin in, on these bridge runs where they're just trying to survive to the next day, these parchment attacks where we weren't even sure if this world had magic. We weren't even sure who the big players were, what's a herald. And here we are entering an era of gods. That just seems really well phrased, because that's what it feels like.
It is cool to see that we've exponentially increased our scope or magnitude of events and things that happen, right? Like at first you're like, oh, did someone assassinate or try to assassinate Elhokar? And now we're like, the end times are upon us, by the way. Like, I hope you're
Yeah.
ready. And and it is crazy to me because right now I fully expect for that to keep growing. I don't know how. I mean, I could kind of guess how, but not really. So I assume we're gonna keep growing, and we're at the middle point of the series, middle of the series. So we've got a ways to go. Like if we've grown this much in half of it, there's still a lot left.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I'm really intrigued and really curious. So
This is jumping around a little bit, but I do want to talk about this real quick. Paul, you referenced, is somebody assassinating Elhokar? And there's that whole side story in the Way of Kings of the saddle girth and the, is Sadeas trying to assassinate him? Is somebody else trying to assassinate him? And it ends up that he cut his own saddle girth, but there was another part to the assassination attempt. Do you guys remember the second part that they never actually figured out?
Was it his shard plate was tampered with?
Yes. So the shard plate has gemstones imbued in it, that you have to replace in order for it to draw Stormlight from and heal itself. But some of his Stormlight was drained. In reference to this next chapter, what happens right before he dies, why would his Stormlight be drained?
That's an interesting train of thought. Given what we know, I have thought back to that and still just kind of assumed that there's any number of ways we've seen that people can drain Stormlight out of things. So I assumed that was someone had done that intentionally. But we're going to get to a moment here in a second where Elhokar speaks the oaths and starts to glow. Like he starts to use Stormlight. And we've seen with Kaladin and Shallan in their backstories and histories how they used surge binding, I guess, long before they realized what they were doing.
Right.
So the thread you're pulling on there leads to, was Elhokar surge binding unknowingly, and he's the one that drained those, that energy out of his armor. That's a thought.
Yep. All the way back then, it's definitely possible that Elhokar was pulling Stormlight in battles without even knowing about it.
That is, I never thought about that. My only thought was was Aesidon around then? Was she around? I don't remember, but maybe she was the saboteur.
It's possible.
But Maybe she was bad all the way back then. Somehow.
All right, stop me if you want to talk about something, but we'll assault the palace here. Callan and Drei and Scar and Shallan fly over the battle straight to the Oath Gate, and their job is to clear the Oath Gate, and everybody else goes through the palace over the Sunwalk, which is basically like a big bridge over to the Oath Gate from the palace. And there's this side stairway that what Shallan went up for the revel, but they decide they can't really assault that. It's only like a one person wide staircase, so like they don't want to assault that. They just want to go through the palace where they have a lot more room to maneuver. So that's the way they go. On their way, they see a head peek over the wall and start smashing towers. Anybody want to talk about that real quick?
I wrote in my notes Thunderclast with a question mark. We've seen a couple references to those types of creatures before and had some like comparisons of them to the chasm fiends and things like that, but they've been described, I think, as like massive creatures of stone that wreck stuff. So this seems fairly consistent.
That does. I didn't actually remember that they were made of stone, but that is super crazy. I mean, in my head, I was assuming it was whatever we kind of saw previously in Delanor's visions, and like on
Yeah.
the cover of the book, we talked about that. There's like a giant leg
True.
and stuff.
There
and
is a giant leg on the back of the book.
Things kind of just point to that, I guess. Like that's my best guess. Whatever that thing is, if that's a Thunderclast or if that's something different.
We get a cool entrance scene to the palace after they run past this Thunderclast. I love this action scene because I don't know if it says this, but I always imagined 3 like big double doors at the front of the palace, and each of the shard bearers takes one of the doors. Azure takes one of the doors, Elokar takes one of the doors, and Adolin takes one of the doors. And they kind of half circle, like assault these doors as they're cutting them open with shard blades. And then basically this huge fight breaks out between the palace guard and the wall guard of Azure. And they're trying to get through as fast as they can because the Parshmen, the Parshendi, the singers, whatever you want to call them, the Voidbringers, have caught on to what's happening, and they're trying to rush the palace. Like, they're coming right in behind them. So they need to take the Oath Gate as fast as they can and swap the Oath Gate to get back to Urithiru, and that hopefully all the army at Urithiru is ready to fight to save Kholinar. Is their plan there? What do you guys think of the assaulting the palace scene?
It was pretty cool. It was very exciting. Yeah, felt very military coordinated breach of the enemy encampment. It was, yeah, very exciting.
This is one of those moments that makes me really excited to hopefully one day see this in a film adaptation. It's just super, super exciting and like really great descriptions. But I mean, it's just a really good action sequence. So that was really cool. There was also, is this where we start to see some more characteristics of Azure here at the end of this chapter?
Elliot, do you want to take this?
I do. I'll open up some questions for you guys, and Paul, I want to know what you think, and I want to know what Trevor thinks too, but he probably won't tell us. But the things I noticed, the things I noticed about Azure in this chapter were several. The first is her turn of phrase again, and this is consistent with some of the recent chapters that we've read of her. She says this phrase, I think it's even the title of the chapter, crimson to break. And she's using it as like a military slang almost. But the use of a color as some sort of turn of phrase is again interesting for all the same reasons we talked about before. So there's that. Adolin notices that she fights differently. And he focuses in on one thing that was a little confusing to me. He's all like confused by the way that she uses her cloak and she like wraps it around her arm like as she's fighting. He thinks of like shard plate or something like that while he watches her do this. I feel like I need to see this visually, like what she's doing here to help this make sense. But she's doing something odd that Adolin notices, and Adolin as a warrior, a dueler, it makes sense that he's going to notice her style's different or she's doing something important. And then the last one, her shard blade. Her shard blade behaves differently on the battlefield. It sounds like, the way I read it, it still is killing enemies like a normal shard blade would, where it's like passing through them, but they, drop to the floor dead. But they specifically note that it does not burn out the eyes of the victim like every single other blade, including things like, Syl and the rest of that, all do. Why is hers different?
Are we also going to acknowledge that her name is a color? Like azure is a color that's, and her cloak's color is azure blue. Like it's not colon blue, it's a different like sky teal blue.
She's got a theme for sure.
So maybe she's team blue and crimson is red, right? And so whenever she says crimson to break, she's like, let's beat the red team. I'm the blue team, like something along those lines. Maybe that's why she's saying it. She doesn't like red. Anyways, her shard blade just breaks every rule I could think of almost. Like, just breaks one rule, right? It doesn't burn out the eyes or things like that. But that's such a big deal. Like, why wouldn't it? It's got to be something different. We know it's an honor blade, right? And so, but
pause.
Zeph did.
Pause there, because we had been assuming honor blade up to this point. I think I was, but fast forward to the final chapter that we're going to talk about, chapter 87. One thing leads to another. They end up in Shadesmar. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And there's our characters and their spren along with them. There's an unknown spren that's there that appears to be another like radiant spren. The only logical conclusion I can come to is that it's Azure's spren. In which case, this may not necessarily be an honor blade. This could be her spren as a blade, but we also know that she doesn't dismiss it, like ever. She like carries it with her, in its holster, in its scabbard or whatever on her,
like a
her
normal
hip.
sword. How
right,
archaic.
So right, old school.
Yeah.
So is her spren just always a blade? Like, these are all the questions I'm asking now. It's definitely different. It's weird.
Maybe I don't know. That is weird, and that was the most notable thing to me, and honestly, probably my favorite moment. I got really excited whenever it showed that there was another spread there, just because I like one thing I'm extremely curious about is seeing all the spread of the different like orders, right? And so my mind is like, what is this one? Who is this? Hello. And it vividly describes, and this one sounded really creepy. The eyes were like scratched out, like someone took a knife to a canvas, is how it is described.
Yep.
and
I
maybe
thought about taking a knife
she's-
to one of my canvases back there as a visual representation, but I did.
Didn't quite go through with that.
Yeah.
Maybe she got her eye scratched out so that she wouldn't take others. I don't know. Something like that. Who knows?
So anyway, lots of questions revolving around Azure at this point.
Okay, the only thing I can think of, the only connection I'm going to try and make here is we've seen another Order of Knight Radiant, at least one example of, that has a very different quirk to the system. Like, it doesn't seem to have any rules, and that's lift with eating to obtain Stormlight, right?
Hmm.
And I'm wondering if there's just some quirk here with the eyes. Maybe it doesn't sever the soul like the others shard blades do, just something different like that. I don't know if there's something random and unique to individuals or orders or what, but that's the only. I'm throwing it into that category with lift that it just doesn't fit in the rule and I don't understand why or what. So
Just a small tidbit of 83 before we push on to 84. The Palace Guard didn't completely turn over with Aesudan. When Aesudan started commanding all of the Palace Guard to do all sorts of weird and questionable things, not all of them went with her, and some of them stayed loyal to Elokar and what they assumed would be the correct thing to do, and then they got imprisoned for it. So they find them and they say, oh, we've been in there a couple days, and it's probably been like a month that they've been in there. So, and they're all seemingly fine. Like, I mean, they're not like totally fine, but they're all healthy-ish. They want to fight. So I want to pause on that for another half second. Did you guys notice the food in the next chapter? How some things, and at the Revel too, how some things are oddly preserved in like,
Yeah.
some things have been rotted, some things are not, some things that should have been are rotted, some of them are not. I always, in my head, applied the same thing of these soldiers that are being neglected in the palace, as along with the food that's being neglected in the palace, are oddly preserved, like somehow. Like they only think a couple days have passed, when in reality, like a month has passed.
I'm reading this as like some weird like time dilation. Like time, we know a month has gone by, but clearly it hasn't been a month for these soldiers that are there, because like you said, they only think it's been a few days, and they also physically look like it's only been a few days. So somehow time has passed differently for them, and that would explain all the food, or at least some of the food. Is no, the food actually only has been sitting there on the table for a day or two, even though it has been a month. So there's a very strange effect going on here. And I keyed in on what I think is actually a very important fact here. The fact that some guards resisted this spren is actually very important in my mind.
Yep, I agree.
This is not just a pure mind control. This is not all the guards are instantly taken over. They have no power or control over this. There is some sort of choice, might be stretching it a little too far, but do you go along with the suggestions of these unmade spren, or do you resist what they're telling you to do? And that definitely changes how I view this whole situation with all these guards and the conflict that we're watching.
I'm really glad you keyed into that, because there's a key difference between just mindless control over anybody who is unfortunate enough to be in the palace and
Right.
a select few who could resist it. And, yeah.
And it's like, yes, this spren has a very strong influence. Yes, we're talking about massively huge temptations. We saw Shallan and her, just kind of completely overtook her mind almost. But at the same time, these are guards who have given into this voice, not necessarily just completely innocent bystanders who were taken over. So, yeah.
Any more on 83?
That was what I had.
Okay. 84, we're going to run up to Aesudan in the King's or in the Royal Chamber. But before we get there, I want to read the epigraph for 84. Okay. I don't know if you guys keyed in on this, but I just want to read it real quick. And it really has nothing to do with what's happening in proper epigraph fashion, what's happening like on screen. However, it's really interesting. The enemy makes another push toward Feverstone Keep. I wish we knew what it was that had them so interested in that area. Could they be intent on capturing Ral Elarim? Now think about the context of this epigraph. What are our epigraphs coming from? Do you guys remember?
Are they still coming from the drawers?
They are. They're coming from the
Yeah.
gemstones in Urithiru. This is the very last recordings of the Knights Radiant before they close the doors of Urithiru. And where's Feverstone Keep? It's a trick question. We don't know. Got him.
I was about to say, yeah. I'm sorry, I don't know this one, Trevor.
No, it's
Well,
it's the I'm just looking for the answer. It's the location of Dalinar's vision of the Recreants. Is that what it's called?
mm-hmm.
Where the Knights Radiant end up surrendering their shards, presumably like right after this epigraph is written. So somebody is writing, why is the enemy interested in Feverstone Keep and Ral Elarim? And then the Knights Radiant who are fighting there surrender their shards to the people at Feverstone Keep. Elliot, you look like you want to talk about this, so go ahead.
You can just see the gleam in my eyes of eagerness when I'm talking
I
to it.
can.
I want to talk to it because I have my handy dandy map next to me right here in my little recording setup. And as soon as I read this, I whipped that out and I was like, okay, this is it. We've been wondering for a long time now where Feverstone Keep is. It didn't seem necessarily super important, but I still really wanted to know. I wanted to kind of put this into context. We know this really, really important event happened at Feverstone Keep. Where in Roshar is that? Now we know, or at least we have a vicinity. If it's in the vicinity of Ral Elarim, that means it's in the very northwest corner of Roshar. I had to hunt for a little bit, but I found Ral Elarim all the way at the very top of Roshar. So, and that's in the realm of Eerie. So, Feverstone Keep seems like it should be up there. Now, I'm a little bit confused though, because we've been told Feverstone Keep is like snowy and has
cold.
like icicles that go sideways and things like that. I thought Eerie was like the tropics.
It is.
That it was like the jungles of Roshar. We know that Roshar, that the continent is in the southern hemisphere of whatever planet it's on. So the southern bits are the cold ones, like the Frostlands and Thalena, and the northern parts are the temperate and warm equatorial regions. So that doesn't seem to line up, but this does seem to be a hint to tell us at least a region of Roshar to look in for Feverstone Keep. I don't know if that's going to be like really important later, but I'm writing it down.
So we've seen Feverstone Keep in visions, right?
Yes.
Like seen it. All these visions were definitely like back in the Day of Recreance or things like that. Right? My guess is like, so the what's the word? The high storms and all of our storms kind of set the weather just about for the region, don't they? My guess is maybe back then maybe it was different. Like the cycle was different, maybe it came from a different way, the air was totally different, whatever. The world is kind of like sort of flipped, or maybe everything was frozen or like whatever. So that makes sense. I'm not too worried about that, I guess, but because we've seen like now our Everstorms are going the other way and stuff, so I'm sure lots of craziness can happen there.
I'd be willing to buy that as well. I'm also looking at the map a little closely, and it does show mountains in the region of Erie there, so it could also be a scenario like, I'm thinking of like Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa, where you have a very warm, jungly type area, but you also have a really tall mountain that gets a lot of snow on the top of it, so I think that's possible too.
Good stuff.